Here's the actual resume that I used to successfully get a job in big law. I'm currently an associate practicing commercial real estate law for a big law firm in Houston. I previously was in Chicago for the same firm, but I've moved offices since I made the move down. I get a lot of questions on how to get into big law, so I thought this exercise might provide some useful context as to how I got into big law in the first place and the experience I had going into the process. So this resume is from all the way back in 2019.
Before the dark times.
But I was in law school at the time. I had just finished my first year of school and was going through the OCI, or on-campus interview process, which is where all the big law firms, or at least many big law firms, come to all the law schools and try to pick talent for the next year. So let's get into the resume with my personal information redacted at the top. The address on this resume is actually a rental property that I still own in Chicago. Anyway, starting with the top, I attended Chicago-Kent College of Law. I was attending on a part-time basis at the time, where I was attending school at night, and then I was working full-time during the day. Now at this time I was working a legal internship, but in the previous year I'd worked full-time in property management, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was part-time in the night program at Chicago-Kent. And in law school they make a very big deal about class rankings, and when it comes to the big law process, when you're at a mid-tier school like Chicago-Kent, they definitely pay very close attention to rankings, because in many cases you're not even able to apply if you're not close to the top 20% of the class. In fact, many of the big law firms that did OCI required a top 10% ranking, which I did not have. I was in the top 22%, but that's in a pretty small sample size since I was only ranked against fellow evening program students, not all the day students, which would have made this a much larger class size. So I was top 7 out of 32, so it was a very small class. So moving just 1 or 2 people back in the rankings would make a pretty big difference on a percentage basis, so I made sure to include the 7 out of 32, so it looked like I was in the top 10. It's an uphill battle, you gotta do what you gotta do. But this resume was updated as of July of 2019, which was the same month that I made it into the law review at Chicago-Kent, where you had to write on. I did not grade on because you needed to be in like the top 5 or 10% of the class, which I wasn't. So I had to write on, and thankfully I did, which allowed me to place that on my resume, which I had to send a separate update to all of these big law firms that I had applied to, because my old resume did not have law review on it because it had been sent out a month or 2 prior. So I followed up with a bunch of recruiters at all of these firms to let them know that I had made law review, so I sent them this updated resume. I also made the moot court team in that previous spring, so that was another thing I made sure to include. And then I also mentioned that I was an honors scholar at Chicago-Kent because that's actually what got me the full ride to school, and it looks decent on a resume, and it did make for some talking points when people were asking me why I chose Chicago-Kent over other schools, which was a common interview question. Moving on, but sticking with the credentialism that's so important in academia, I also included my undergrad degree, which was at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I was a double major in economics and history, and I picked up a business minor as well, and I actually graduated in 3 years, which was another decent talking point during the interview since it showed I could take on a packed schedule to accelerate things, which I guess is important in big law. I listed the 2 organizations that I spent the most time on when I was at Illinois, including the mock trial team, which I ended up being president of, and was a huge learning experience for how to run teams and how to push initiatives in a very collaborative structure. So it was a really good experience for that. And then of course you had the legal side of things, which was actually talking in a courtroom setting and working on my public speaking skills and all that good stuff. And then I also had Rho Epsilon, which was the real estate club on campus and was a really great networking tool. And as an overarching theme of this resume, I wanted to make it very clearly real estate oriented. There were other things I could have included on here, but I made sure to try and focus it towards things that were either very legal heavy or very real estate heavy, because I was going for a real estate oriented law job. And I pretty much only applied to firms that had a real estate practice. And moving down the resume, we get to legal experience, which would be any job that I had in the actual legal field rather than all the other jobs I might have had before, which is where we get to Higgins and Branchout, which was a job I actually landed because I had met one of the partners at this firm through Rho Epsilon, the real estate club at the University of Illinois. So it was really a powerful lesson in networking for me, because I would not have gotten the job had I not been in that club and had I not met the people that I met. But after my first year of school, I thought I'd go ahead and abandon the property management ship and go straight for a legal career, and this was the first opportunity that arose. In fact, the partner at this firm asked me at a lunch that we were having just casually to catch up if I needed a job for the summer and if I was interested in coming to work for them. So I thought about it and decided it was time to quit my other job and go for this because it seemed like a really good opportunity, and it was. So I got some good commercial real estate law focused experience, which was really great for interviewing for a commercial real estate law job at a big law firm. And fun fact, I've actually hired Higgins and Branchout to handle some of my own real estate matters. So we still have a really good relationship relationship. Now, I've mentioned my property management job a couple times already, and that is this next section of the resume under professional experience. So this would be non-legal experience, and that was at Draper & Kramer, which is a large real estate company, and they had a condo management arm of their company, which they eventually sold off. But I was with them while they still owned that portion of the company, and what they basically did is they managed various condo associations. So if the association wanted to have on-site management or even off-site management, they would hire Draper & Kramer, and then they'd have a variety of association level teams, and I was on one of those. It was ultimately a customer service job. You're dealing with resident issues. If they have a problem with something, you're usually the first line of contact, and you're trying to solve problems while keeping a smile on your face, which can be pretty stressful, but it was simple enough work that I could go to law school at night and still do this job during the day and not feel like I was super overwhelmed. And I generally enjoyed the job. It was a good experience, and it really fit my schedule well during my time at law school. Since the work usually didn't follow me home, so I could really focus on law school at night and then focus on this job during the day, and there wasn't a whole lot of overlap. But I felt like my ceiling for growth there was a little bit low, at least relative to some other opportunities. So I thought it was a better opportunity to go for that internship with Higgins & Branchow and go straight for a law job. But overall, the experience wasn't too relevant to practicing law, but it did provide some good perspective and some good talking points for the interview, since we could talk about silly property management stories, of which there were many. And I think a lot of people I interviewed with like seeing Draper & Kramer on the resume, since it's a big real estate firm, and if I wanted to practice real estate law, it's good to be familiar with the industry and what's going on, so I think that helped. And after multiple years of listening to the Bigger Pockets podcast, I was pretty well versed in real estate terminology and real estate investing, so I could talk the talk, at least when it came to the interview, for real estate specific stuff. But anyways, rewinding a bit, back when I was still in Champaign at the University of Illinois, I worked part-time at a multifamily developer which owned a number of large multifamily properties outside of campus, so I actually worked on site at a couple of those, and I worked the front desk and was a leasing agent for a couple of these properties, so it was a very similar experience to the other property management experience I got later on in condo management, in that you're dealing with tenant issues and that sort of thing. But this one had more of a sales aspect to it too, since I was actually showing apartments. Another job that provided some nice perspective, but wasn't too relevant to the law specifically. So that was it for my job experience that I actually left on the resume. I worked other jobs beside this, but you really have to focus the resume to make sure that it's highlighting the things that you want highlighted for this specific interview. But one of the last sections here was the leadership section, and I used this section to talk a little bit more about my experience as the president of the Illinois trial team, because that took a lot of time while I was an undergrad, and it's something I was really proud of. So I tried to highlight a number of things that we worked on, including launching a scholarship, which we did towards the end of my time at school. We reopened a high school clinic program, and then my job really as the president was to moderate discussions and work through ideas, get people bought into the mission of whatever we were trying to do. And I also spent a lot of time trying to build up a new coaching base for the team, because basically it was a student organization, but we tried to have either law student or faculty coaches that would help us to hone our mock trial skills. But otherwise, there's the publication section of the resume, which is where I listed a scholarship that I had won, which was for an article called Short-Term Pain, Long-Term Wonder. This was about the real estate market and investing in real estate in general. And that article, I believe, is still posted if you want to go find it on foreclosure.com if they still have it up. But that was a scholarship that I had won based on this essay that I submitted, so I decided to include it here. And then finally, all of us law students were told to include an interest section on the resume, so I included baseball, real estate, and cooking. So if we ever needed an extra talking point, we could talk about those things. And yes, I know that's pretty cheesy to put real estate in as your interest when you're applying to a real estate job, but I spent a lot of time with Bigger Pockets, so I felt like I needed to put it on there. Now, in addition to this resume, I also had to include a writing sample in my application and also my academic history, so that all had to come with it, but really most of the focus is on your resume and also a cover letter to that resume. And in each of the cover letters that I sent to these big law firms, I always tried to have a name drop of someone I had met at the firm, because I tried to make an effort to meet someone at all the firms I was applying to, or at least most of the firms, especially the ones that I felt like I had a decent shot with. And by the end of the process, I'd gone through a handful of interviews and I landed one big law offer at the firm that I'm currently working at now. They had their office in Chicago, that's where I started, and a couple years later, I'm now in Houston at their Houston office. So all is well. Although 2020 was a little bit stressful because I ended up losing the summer associate job that I got at the end of this process, but they ended up making offers to the summer associates to come back the next year as full-time associates when everything ideally would return to normal. And while we're probably not back to normal by 2019 standards, all ended up well for me personally, so can't complain. But otherwise, be sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this about my legal career and be sure to leave a comment below about the topics you'd like to see me talk about next. But until next time, take care.